Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today finally with the updated deck profile for B.M.R or Brilliant Magical Reptiles. The story behind this deck, pretty much, I took Psychics with all of their slow setups to locals, got totally destroyed, and I decided, let's take a break from Psychics for a bit, and until I can find out some way to accelerate that strategy, let's come up with something that I don't think will lose quite as easily, at least on the local level. Went through all the decks that I used to play, as well as the 10 of cards that I have in my toolbox to see what options I had, and this is really what I came up with as kind of this consistent conglomerate strategy that puts together a lot of different archetypes. It's not necessarily tied to any one theme, but I feel like it's a very effective rank 4 toolbox deck that has the ability to give a lot of the metagame decks you'll see a run for their money. So we're gonna go through and profile this. As I usually do, I'll be building this deck for you step by step so you can see my reasoning as to why certain cards are in here in the first place, but you can click Brilliant Fusion here to accelerate yourself right to the alphabetical profile you're probably used to. That will just be, sorted by monster, spells, traps, alphabetical, then you see the extra. So you can go check that out, or you can always come back to this part or just sit back, relax, and we're gonna go through the building process. So as with any deck, we're going to start off by establishing the core. The idea is pretty simple. We're going to put some level 4 monsters on the field as efficiently as possible so that we can make the most out of our rank 4 toolbox in the extra deck. The engine that I really like using right now for this deck involves Performage Trick Clown. So this is a monster, it's a spellcaster with 16/12 for its stats, and its ability is anytime it hits the graveyard, even if it was an Xyz material or just something from the deck or hand, if it hits that graveyard once per turn, you could special summon a Performage monster in your graveyard, but then you take 1,000 damage, and then your monster's stats get reduced to 0. So you don't care too much about the fact that the Trick Clown won't be doing any attacking, because anytime you detach this as a material, you get a free card off of it. And when you're able to make King of the Feral Imps, who can fetch you a reptile monster, you'll be able to make further Xyz Summons in the same turn. And that's largely possible due to this card here. It's called Yugioh. We'll actually put it down here with the king. But basically, this is a reptile you could fetch off of the King of the Feral Imps. It says if you control a spellcaster type monster, you can special summon this guy right from your hand. And you can only control one of these per turn, but that's really its only weakness. So basically, you just have to throw this guy down as early as possible so that you can go and Xyz with him. Then if you have an additional copy of Yugioh, you can go right ahead and summon that again if you have another spellcaster. Then to make sure Yugioh comes to the field consistently, we'll be playing 3 copies of Performage Hat Tricker. Hat Tricker is kind of like a weird cross between these two. It is another Performage monster. It's a spellcaster that allows the summoning of Yugioh, but it has an ability that says if you have, or if there are at least 2 monsters on the board, including your opponent's guys, you can just drop this guy straight from your hand. So if you're going second, you could potentially drop this straight from your hand without playing any monster, drop a Yugioh for free, and that potentially lets you go King of the Feral Imps without even using your normal summon. Of course, it won't always be like that, but just to give you an idea of how easy it is to bring monsters to the field for that rank 4 summon. Then I really like how Trick Clown serves as this longevity play. It keeps giving us more material for Xyz monsters, and similarly we'll be playing Star Drawing to that effect. It lets you draw a card anytime you use it as an Xyz material, so that'll help keep our hand up and our options live so that we can go and make as many summons as possible. And because this is a normal summon only monster, much like the Trick Clown, to help balance things out, I'm running 2 copies of Kage. This is also a reptile you could search with King of the Feral Imps, but pretty much if you normal summon any level 4 monster, you can go and special that Kage. So if you summon any of these, especially that Star Drawing, or even that Trick Clown, you can drop that Kage from your hand and allow an easy rank 4 summon, which enables you to go for your other cards thanks to your extra deck. So now that we have a decent core that allows us to put together Xyz Summons, let's go and look at some of the cards that will become stellar all-stars in our extra deck toolbox. First, I want to run the Abyss Dweller because this ability to shut down things like Burning Abyss and Cosmo in their tracks, I feel is so good. You may even consider running 2 in this deck because that Yugioh is an extra water monster you can use with that effect. It really just depends on the environment you're playing in, but I'll start with 1. Castell's a decent problem solver in general, and that will allow you to go and push monsters out of the field if they're problematic, or just allow you to clear the board for game. Gagaga Samurai is interesting because this strategy brings a lot of free monsters like Trick Clown and the Gigabyte, and all these guys just happen to have low attack, so if you're able to consolidate them into 1900 attacking twice, this will allow for very big pushes, potentially allow you to OTK, especially with some of the other tech that I plan on fleshing this main deck out with. In a similar vein, we have Performage Trapeze Magician. This card needs 2 Spellcasters to summon, but if you do, it's pretty easy to do with the Trick Clowns and the Hat Trickers. This guy lets any of your other monsters attack twice a turn, and so if you have a 3000 attack monster, then all of a sudden you're doing 8500 damage on an open board and you're able to win out of nowhere. So these guys really put a lot of pressure on the opponent, allow you to just win the game outright. I really like Trap Trick's Rafflesia because it allows us to access a very strong turn 1 play. Pretty much you can go summon King of the Fairlimbs for your free card, and that'll let you get a second Xyz monster. And if you sit on Rafflesia, the trap hole options you have nowadays will probably allow you to safely sit there and not take your opponent's beating straight to the face. So that's to help strengthen our setup, especially if we're going first and don't necessarily want to go for one of these problem-solving cards. Though I guess you could go Dweller, so it's just an alternative there. And let's see, I want to play the full Utopia suite here for the Lightning. So Utopia, I rarely ever use, but I can't say I've never used this effect because I actually have. I mean, sometimes protecting a monster is the way to go, but most of the time you will just go for Prime and then for Lightning. Lightning's the main reason you play this trio. It lets you go and pretty much stop your opponent from responding as you attack with a 5000 attack Behemoth, and that can outright end games. And then the Utopia Prime replaced the Ray that I'd been using just as a tech previously. The Ray really was just in there because that was the only copy of the card I had. Prime's a lot better because although it has a hefty life point cost, there are times with this deck with Trick Clown you will end up getting pretty low on life, and if the difference ends up being 3000 in your opponent's favor, you can go and banish all their special summon monsters, which allows you to clear the game, or clear the board for game. And because it doesn't take away from our setup at all, I'm going to be running 1 copy of the Utopic Future. This guy needs 2 non-number Xyz monsters of the same rank. And you can see this top row here is all non-number Xyz monsters with the same rank. He has an interesting ability where he can't be killed pretty much by anything, and anytime he gets killed by a card effect, you can just detach a material instead. And if your opponent has a monster that you battle in either turn with this guy, you'll be able to go and steal it, attack with that, and that usually ends up forcing the opponent into a defensive position if they don't just outright lose the game from having their boss monsters turn against them. Now it's time to flesh out the main deck and extra deck just a little more with some support tech that'll help our core reach the goal of summoning those Xyz monsters. First, I want Norden in this deck with 2 copies of Instant Fusion, and the main reason is Norden's ability to just go bring out a monster for free lets you go for a 1-card Xyz summon with absolutely no materials. This is great because since you bring the monster back and you get its graveyard effects, you can use Trick Clown and start setting that up again if your opponent killed it more than once in that turn and prevented it from sticking on the board. You can go and bring back Star Drawing and go draw 1 card when you Xyz summon because that becomes the effect of the Xyz monster thanks to Star Drawing no longer being on the field, where it could get negated by Norden. So very, very powerful targets exist in this deck. Plus as another water monster, this is just another reason why the Abyss Dweller becomes a really strong pick in this deck. I chose 2 mainly because I don't have another fusion target for Norden, and although mathematically speaking, you probably would be fine in terms of the early game if you played 3 copies of Instant Fusion, I found that in testing, I don't necessarily think the extra chance of drawing the Instant Fusion turn 1 really outweighs the benefit, really outweighs the harm caused by drawing into multiple Instant Fusions in a slightly longer game. So I just chose to play 2. Feel free to toy around with that number a little bit, but I think 2 is fine because of all the other things that you will be playing in this deck anyway. Then we can go ahead and play, of course this is Brilliant Magical Reptiles. Pretty much I am playing the Seraphonite with 2 Garnet and the 3 Brilliant Fusion. And the reason for this is originally I built a deck with Brilliant Fusion and I used things like Madolche Magellane. I was like, let's use Gemknight Seraphonite's double normal summon ability, bring out Magellane, bring out another Magellane from the hand, pretty much go gadget style and go for free Xyz monsters that way. It worked really nicely because Magellane itself is also a spellcaster, and it would synergize perfectly with the Gigabytes and Kagetokages and everything else. But as that deck evolved in the way it did that format, and with my experience level back then, I guess, the deck just took a turn where it no longer made sense to play the Brilliant Fusion engine or the Magelanes. But after a break from the deck and seeing the format develop a bit more, I started realizing that Brilliant Fusion is actually an extremely good pick for this deck because it allows you to instantly fetch that Trick Clown, get it really consistently, and then start setting up multitudes of Xyz Summons in a row that allow you to put together game-winning boards with Trapeze Magician. So that's really why it's in here. The main reason I play the 2 Garnet is it's similar to the Instant Fusion case of 2. Yes, mathematically, playing 1 Garnet should be okay most of the time, but just the reality is there will be games where you will draw the 1 Garnet, and I'd really rather not have the 4 dead cards. That cost to me is just way too large. I'd rather play that 2nd Garnet and rely on my other monsters in my hand to allow me to make plays than have 4 cards be dead. And that's why I'm personally playing it. To take advantage of that, I'm running the 1 copy of Daigusto Emerald in the extra, and of course this has the kind of like mini Pot of Avarice recycling effect, which is very nice on Norden, but it's also really powerful because now you can bring back a Garnet with this Xyz monster, which brings back a free Xyz material, and if you detach Trick Clown, then that's another free Xyz monster right next to that Emerald, allowing you to more easily push for game. So it ends up working out if you support that engine well enough. So pretty much I'm dealing with the inconsistencies of multiple Garnets by playing cards that will allow me to ultimately put more damage on the board consistently. I'm playing the 1 Nefarious Archfiend, Eater of Nefariousness. This is similar to Gigabyte. In fact, it works nicely with Gigabyte and was made for that purpose. This has the same special summon effect, so if you have a Spellcaster, this is pretty much a 4th copy of Gigabyte. And his ability is, if he's in your graveyard, you can kill one of your own monsters you no longer need at the end phase of your opponent's turn to bring this guy back. So anything, either Trick Clown or a monster with Trick Clown as material that you no longer need in the following turn, just kill that to bring this back. Trick Clown will come back next to it, and you have 2 materials without doing anything going into your turn, and that's very similar to the Clown Blade strategy where you'd have Trick Clown and Heroic Challenger 1000 Blades. So this is also a 15-200 monster in terms of stats, and that allows Gigabyte to actually float into this guy. Gigabyte has a lesser known floating ability where if he gets killed you can bring out a monster with the same stats as him, but is not named Gigabyte, and this card just so conveniently has been designed in a way that you can go and do that. Part of that Charmer archetype. Next is 3 copies of Yugioh. This is one of my favorite hand traps of all time. This guy is amazing both offensively and defensively in this deck. It's an extra monster that lets you go make your Xyz Summons. It's 1700 extra attack that can wipe out your opponent's monster before using its attack pump ability to allow one of your double attackers, think Gagaga Samurai or the Performage Trapeze Magician target, to attack twice with the boost, and that ends up putting so much extra damage on the board that fields that should not end the game suddenly do. I feel like Yugioh is an absolute must in this deck at 2, and personally I've just been loving it at 3, because then it serves as a defensive option that gains you life in a deck that you already pay a ton for the Trick Clowns and the Instant Fusions. I've had no complaints with Yugioh thus far. And finally, so the last new addition to the main strategy is the 3 copies of Rank Up Magic Limited Variance Force. So this card I thought would be pretty bad because realistically I hadn't spent a ton of time reading the magics because there were just so many of them. But this thing lets you target any rank 4 Xyz monster you control, so that's really easy to fulfill. And special summon from your extra deck any number C monster that has 1 rank higher, so a rank 5, by using it as an Xyz material. The special summons treat as an Xyz, and you get all those materials of the original monster on the new monster. So what's that really do? Well, first, that does let you summon something like Silent Honor Dark, which is an alternative, evolved version of the Arc. So this guy lets you just steal a special summon monster once per turn. Not necessarily as good as Arc, because we can't bring it out on its own, but the real reason that we're playing the Variance Force is this new card called S0 Utopic Zexal, or Zale, however you like to pronounce it. This amazing monster says you need 3 number Xyz monsters with the same rank to summon, so since I don't play any numbers besides the Utopias and the F0 and the S0, I won't be bringing this guy out normally. But he has a condition that lets you special summon it with any Utopia monster you control if you discard a Rank Up Magic normal spell from your hand. So there we have the Rank Up Magics here. This guy comes out as a monster with all those other monsters and the materials under it as materials on himself and gains 1000 attack for each. So if you think, go 2 monsters into Utopia into the S39, the Prime. You can't use Lightning as material for Xyz, so you can't do that. But you get 4 guys on this. He gets 1,000 attack and defense for each of those materials, so that's 4,000 attack and defense, which is already amazing. And then, once per turn during your opponent's turn, even in like their draw phase, you can detach a material and prevent them from activating or playing any cards that turn. They can only summon or set pretty much. Shuts them off from any effects, shuts them off from spells and traps. It pretty much allows you to control the game in such a huge manner that you can just have multiple turns, doing your own thing, building up those OTK boards, and your opponent can't really respond at all. And although in many ways this does seem more like a cheap way to win, what I did find is this is just so effective when you're going against like a deck like Burning Abyss. Nothing triggers. It's like an Abyss Dweller on steroids. You just block everything out. If you're playing against a deck that has a lot of annoying trap cards or hand traps or monster effects that trigger anything, it shuts off all effects. And this really allows you to take a dominating force or dominating position in the duel because you prevent your opponent from attacking while you're allowed to spend the multiple turns getting your kill setups ready. And last but certainly not least, here are the tech cards that we are using to finish out the main deck. First, I'm playing the 1 Raigeki as a power card. This is amazing anytime you have Abyss Dweller out, of course, but in general, this deck just attacks so much to win games that I feel like it's worth having Raigeki as an easy out to your opponent's board, just to clear for game. So that's in there. We're playing 3 copies of Twin Twisters, and the reason for 3, even if the opponents might not be playing tons of back row, is decks with back row present the biggest problem to this strategy because they have the most potential to stop a card like Zexal from hitting the board by stopping Utopia or whatever. So I'd really rather err on the side of having too many Twin Twisters in this deck. And the fact that you can discard things like Trick Clown that actually get set up by the Twisters is actually beneficial because then you get to start your strategy off without as much of an investment. So overall, enabling you to go and make your plays that you don't really want to just like throw your monsters into back row for, I think is extremely powerful. And if you need to side them out, then great, you have some extra slots to do that. 2 copies of Maxi. This was the big change in the new Forbidden and Limited list that made me delay the release of this deck profile, but I think it ended up becoming a lot better as a result, so I'm actually kind of thankful for Konami on that, for their indirect, unexpected help here. But 2 Maxi is still very powerful because anytime you go second, you get to basically force your opponent into this really awkward situation. It's like S0 in a way. If your opponent doesn't special summon a ton because of Maxi, you are basically buying yourself the time you need to put together an OTK field and just kill them through their weak resistance. Or you can use the Maxi to draw so many cards off your opponent's push, survive with a card like Yugioh out of nowhere, and then you'll be able to push back with all the resources that you gain. So overall, Maxi is a phenomenal defensive card in this strategy because you have the ways of using those draws immediately. Because of Rafflesia, we'll be playing these 2 Trap Holes. Bottomless needs no introduction here, but Floodgate is one of my new favorites here because it triggers on any summon at all, regardless of the size of the monster or the kind of summon, and it flips down all the monsters that were summoned by that. So since those monsters can't be turned up, it's very much like Quaking Mirror Force. It completely shuts down Burning Abyss because now all their Burning Abyss monsters self-destruct. It flips down big annoying monsters like Cosmo, Dark Destroyer, and prevents them from, just totally wrecking you because now their monsters face down. It's targetable. You can kill it with something easy like Abyss Dweller and just get rid of it. It just opens up so many plays, and the reason I chose these 2 in particular is because they're trap cards that I really wouldn't mind drawing into. I experimented with a lot of other trap holes when I wasn't sure how this deck should go for the new format, and I just found, yes, Treacherous Trap Hole, Void Trap Hole, all these options are very powerful in certain situations, but these are hands down the most generic and the cards that I am actually happy to draw into, so that's why they're in here. Then, to finish out the deck, I am playing, with the new reprint, the full Solemn Brigade of Warning and 3 Strike here. So the reason these exist is the same thing as why you would play Utopic Zexal or you'd play the Maxi. These counter traps allow you to stop your opponent's play, usually for a good chunk of a turn, if not the entire turn, and buying yourself that time when you can keep your board on the field and then mount that momentum to win the game the next turn is extremely powerful. I wouldn't necessarily play these trap cards in every strategy, but again, this is just such a fast-paced, aggressive strategy that if you can keep your opponent down and out of the game with these trap cards, you can easily capitalize on their weakness and just outright win. If you watched this video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you learned something about why this deck was put together the way it was and kind of my theories behind why certain cards should be included in a deck's core functioning. But anyway, let's get to the alphabetical list of this. So, we're going to start off with the main deck. We have 2 copies of Gem Knight Garnet, 3 copies of Gigabyte, 3 copies of Jurigato, 2 Kagetokage, 2 Max C, 1 Nefarious Archfiend Eater of Nefariousness, 3 Performage Hat Tricker, 3 Trick Clown, 3 Star Drawing. Then for spells we have 3 Brilliant Fusion, 2 Instant Fusion, 3 Rank Up Magic Limited Variance Force, a Raigeki, and 3 Twin Twisters. And then for traps we have Bottomless Trap Hole, Floodgate Trap Hole, 3 Solemn Strikes, and 1 Solemn Warning. And that makes a 40 card main deck. Then for our extra deck we have 1 F0 Utopic Future, 1 S0 Utopic Zexal, or Zael, Abyss Dweller, Castel, Daigusto Emerald, Samurai, King of the Feral Imps, the number 101, or C101, Silent Honor Dark, Trapeze Magician, Rafflesia, number 39 Utopia, the S39 Prime, the 39 Lightning, and then for fusions we have Elder Entity Norden as well as the 1 Gem Knight Seraphinite. So that is the Brilliant Magical Reptiles, or B.M.R deck, finally profiled for you guys, and now that the format has been updated. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of this deck. If you're interested in testing it, then I encourage you to go do that. Let me know how that works for you. You probably might need to adjust things to match whatever metagame or environment that you play in, but I think it's a solid enough core that you can have fun with this and do pretty well at any small locals or just playing around with your friends. So thanks guys, this is JDGaming. Hope you guys enjoyed once again, and I'll see you guys next time.